Here's how to watch Gintama the right way. I need this since I'm about to start my Gintama journey. Let's get straight into it.
If you started Gintama because someone told you that it's a Shonen Jump classic, or that it has some of the best arcs in all of manga, then
Well,
you're
I can.
probably watching it the wrong way. Don't get me wrong, both of these things are true, but Gintama falls into this weird place where it's not really like other anime and manga, especially now when people like to judge a story based on how they can binge it. I mean, let's be honest, whether you're reading the manga or watching the anime, Gintama isn't exactly easy to binge. Which begs
Really?
the question, does a story need to be bingeable to be good? The answer is, well, it depends. A lot of it depends on pacing.
Yeah, I wonder, is the pacing bad?
Gintama goes back and forth between comedy arcs and serious arcs, so obviously the pacing has its ups and downs. But generally speaking, the better the pacing, the more likely you'll be able to binge a story. For example, one of the quickest binges I have ever done in my entire life is my read of Chainsaw Man.
Oh my god, I can't wait to watch Chainsaw, bro. I need to start that journey too.
Paced and moves at such a good speed that weekly readers were constantly at the edge of their seat, and everyone else gets this impulse to read all 97 chapters in one day. So if this was the only manga you ever read before you started Gintama, you'd probably be inclined to drop it since the pacing is completely different. But there's one thing you have to keep in mind when you're talking about these kinds of stories that are released on a weekly or monthly basis. Sometimes you do get something like Chainsaw Man, where it really doesn't matter whether you read it weekly or binge it. Then there's stories like One Piece. To be fair, there's a lot of One Piece, but the pacing sort of comes and goes with each arc. So for right now, let's just look at Wano. Even in Wano, the pacing is all over the place. But for the most part, it's not that great when you're reading it on a weekly basis.
They really be making memes about One Piece pacing. That is so funny.
Especially in Onigashima when it takes Luffy like 10 chapters to climb a flight of stairs. Never mind the other 10 he spent just getting to them. But that's the weekly read. Speaking from my own experience, the pacing is way better when you're able to binge it, and plenty of other people have told me the same thing. So there are stories like One Piece where it feels like it was made to be read in volumes, even though chapters are published on a weekly basis. Then there's stories like JoJo's, specifically JoJo's Part 3. I know it's the most cliche thing you can say about JoJo's, but you can't avoid the fact that JoJo's Part 3 has the so-called villain of the week format. The pacing in the beginning is fine, and the pacing in the end is awesome. But when the characters are on their way to Egypt and they have to go through the same bit every time a new villain appears, then it starts to feel like a force just to get through the story. And it's this villain of the week structure that makes it seem like JoJo's Part 3 was specifically intended to be enjoyed on a weekly basis. So binging a story clearly isn't the definitive answer. Sometimes a story can be binged and it's that much more fun because of it, but sometimes a story is clearly intended for this weekly experience. And you're going to drive yourself crazy if you try and binge it.
Okay.
And that's why Gintama is sort of in a category of its own. Like I said before, it goes back and forth between these comedy arcs and serious arcs. But there's a lot of those comedy arcs, or just comedy chapters that are over and done with in one chapter. And as I'm sure you've heard, the comedy in Gintama is very unique. But what makes Gintama any different? There's plenty of comedies like Kaguya-sama that are incredibly binge-worthy. In fact, ask fans of Spy Family and they'll tell you that the pacing
Spy Family, I need to watch this one too.
Better when you just binge it. To understand what makes Gintama different, we need to look at the 3 reasons it's difficult to binge. The first of which is the actual source material. But before we do that, I want to just give a quick shout out to Mr. Duck for their comment.
Y'all did tell me that Gintama at first is slow. It's slow pacing, but it gets crazy like later on.
Of the week on my last Eden Zero video. If you'd like to see your comment in the next video, then make sure to share your thoughts on Gintama down below. With that out of the way, let's look at how the...
You say you binge Gintama over quarantine? Oh man, that's the perfect time. You finish it in 3 weeks? Okay, I just need to lock in.
Manga is structured with the help of my very sexy editor, Saxy.
I love the Gintama manga so much, yet I just couldn't binge it to save my life.
Yeah.
The manga is structured in a way that allows a lot of these jokes to hit, with its great paneling, comedic timing, and one department where it really shines, the setup to all of the jokes. The author has no qualms with making the entire arc a setup for a joke at the end of it, as
See, I'm not a manga guy anyway, so it don't affect
well as
me.
make it truly pay off pretty much every single time. It's hilarious. And when you combine this and its weekly release schedule, you'll get the reason for why most of its arcs are only a couple chapters long, and why it's a fairly slow read. Yes, in fact, it took me over 9 months to finish it. I caught up
Nah,
to One
9
Piece in
months
2.5,
crazy.
and it's not even like I prefer one over the other all that too much. I just realized that I enjoyed Gintama the most during my 20-minute bus rides, where every joke landed and my mind was fresh. Whenever I started binging it, my brain would be on the information overload immediate restart needed screen by the 30th chapter or so. So I gotta recommend reading it quite casually.
So, as you can see, the source material is structured in a way that makes the majority of Gintama difficult to binge. Even if you watch the anime, you'll still get this feeling that the story moves at a relatively slow pace. And this might not seem
So you watched Gintama a few years ago and you finished in a very short time? Okay.
so bad to people if the comedy was just weaved into the
I
story.
mean, 300
But the
episodes
issue
not
is
that
the
bad.
broader narrative goes through these stages where the entire plot is just a bit, and what the characters are actually doing isn't all that relevant. But is that really a problem? To answer that question, we need to look at the next reason why Gintama is so hard to binge: the comedy arcs.
Comedy.
Gintama is notorious for this dynamic between the comedy arcs and the serious arcs, and it's no accident that this is how we talk about the general structure of Gintama. I mean, the characters explicitly mention these terms in the anime. It's not like One Piece where comedy is sprinkled into the broader narrative. In Skypiea, you can see Zoro imitating Tarzan and Luffy doing the world's best Sanji impression, but what you're really there for is the struggle against Enel. But in Gintama, the large majority of the story consists of plotlines that are very short and lack any real tension. So while many shonen manga can be considered a comedy, Gintama is closer to what you might consider a true comedy, because it focuses a lot more on the jokes and the humor than on the actual plot itself. Now, don't take this the wrong way, Gintama obviously has a plot, but more often than not, that plot is just a catalyst for the character-driven humor.
Okay, but yeah, I like that though. It's different. They're taking a different route. So it's more focused on the comedy than like the actual plot. I like that. I
These
like
short
that.
plot lines, the actual plot itself is almost peripheral. Fans don't
As
care
long
that
as it's
Kagura
funny,
was being chased
got
by
no
gangsters.
problem.
They don't care whether Otose used to hand out free dango. And nobody cares that Hasegawa had a job as a cab driver. Hasegawa is a special case though, because for him, literally nobody cares. Kagura even calls him a loser and gives him his iconic nickname. But while we're on the topic, let's take a closer look at this particular episode. In episode 16, Hasegawa finds himself lost after his boss fires him and his wife walks out on him. He gets turned down at several job interviews all in one day, gets drunk and spends all his cash, gets falsely accused of a crime and verbally harassed by the police before they let him go, then mopes about his bad luck. That's halfway into the episode and there's no real tension. It's just 10 minutes of Hasegawa quite literally being a loser. The other half consists of him getting a job as a cab driver only to lose his job when he decides to help out a younger couple. So the episode ends with Hasegawa in the same position he was in at the start of the episode. If you're
Ooh.
binging Gintama and you're only interested in the episodes that seem relevant, then you might skip this episode since nothing really
Yeah,
happens.
I ain't gonna lie. If I'm really binging this, yeah, this might be real boring. But if I'm just watching this casually, I think it's meant to be watched casually. Okay.
But if you do that, then you miss out on everything this episode has to offer. Maybe it's a little too close to home for some of us, but the reason this episode is so funny is because Hasegawa is probably the world's unluckiest person. We've all had our rough times, so we're able to laugh at Hasegawa because he clearly has it worse. And this is only exaggerated by the way the other characters treat him like the jobless loser he is. But then you have Gintoki, who treats Hasegawa like an equal. In turn, Hasegawa feels like he's found a kindred spirit, and the two develop a dynamic based on this commonality. So while there's no real plot in this episode to invest in,
Hey,
you
yo.
find yourself invested in these characters and hooked on the running gags that they develop in each episode. Now, of course, you can only tolerate so many episodes like this for so long. If every episode was the same and nothing ever really happened, then despite how much you like the characters, you're going to get bored of the story and just stop watching. This is where you can see that a lot of Gintama was clearly intended for this weekly experience. So, like me, you might take a break here and there. Fortunately, the first 49 episodes are able to stay exciting by adding one new character after another. Once the main cast has pretty much been established, that's when Sorachi, the mangaka, introduces what most people consider the first truly serious arc of Gintama, the Beni Sakura arc. The Beni Sakura arc is full of drama, as it has Gintoki face off against his first real challenge in the show, and it's the
I can't wait to get to this
first arc with villains that actually feel like a
I
threat.
gotta see this
The
dude.
payoff for this tension is tons of action, unlike what you've seen so far. I mean, at one point, one of the characters literally asks if they've suddenly changed shows. The arc is so good that they even adapted it into its own movie. But here's the thing. It's easy to see arcs like Beni Sakura and say to yourself, okay, if I just push through these first 50 episodes, then I can finally see where it gets good. As you can probably guess, I've already laid out the problem. Beni Sakura is 4 episodes. There's another
4 episodes?
57 episodes before that. If you just skim over those episodes, then you're missing out
I'm
on
thinking this is like a long arc. Only 4 episodes?
the whole first year of Gintama. So for example, let's say you skip the infant arc. You're like, Gintoki watching a baby, I'll just pass. But guess what? If you do that, then you miss his fight against Okada, and you have no idea who the guy is in Beni Sakura. Not to mention all the other context you miss out on by skipping over these earlier episodes. But anyone will tell you that. They'll tell you not to skip certain episodes because they're relevant in the later arcs. But that's just part of
everything's
the problem.
important.
We've already touched on it a few times throughout the video, but there's one thing that can make Gintama even more difficult to binge. Even more than the manga structure or the comedy. And it's your expectations.
Alright, how to watch. That's what I'm here for.
The biggest trap you
You said the longest serious arc is like 26 episodes? Okay.
can fall
Good to
into
hear.
is starting Gintama because of these serious arcs. Somebody might tell you, the serious arcs are so good, just skip the comedy arcs. You might even look up posts like this one that tell you which episodes are relevant. But go to the bottom and the person comes right out and says that you shouldn't use this on your first watch of Gintama. And the first comment reveals that apparently, this person originally wrote another post but had to write a new one once they realized certain episodes were more relevant than they thought. So the takeaway from this is
Yeah, basically watch everything. That's what I got from it.
that if you just get into Gintama for these serious arcs,
Yeah, watch
your
everything.
enjoyment of the show is going to be a fraction of what it should be. But this actually illustrates the main point I've been trying to make about why this approach to watching Gintama just doesn't work. The comedy arcs are not there to build up the serious arcs. Let me say that again. The comedy arcs are not there to build up the serious arcs. In all honesty, it's quite the opposite. To explain exactly what I mean, let's look at one more arc, the Mitsuba arc. This arc is only 2 episodes, and you almost never see it compared to the big ones like Shogun Assassination. But I can't help but find myself looking back on it as my favorite arc. Like Beni Sakura, it's incredibly dramatic and has a lot more action than the earlier episodes. But that's not what makes the Mitsuba
Sword
arc
to
as good as
chin.
it is. The real beauty is how this arc builds on the character traits and dynamics that are established in previous episodes. Before this arc, the Shinsengumi were in kind of a weird spot, where
That's the
even
top
though they're
10
good
arc
guys, they're
of
also
Gintama?
working for the corrupt
Hey.
government. But any doubts you might have had cleared up right away in the Mitsuba arc. In this arc, you see a whole new side to the
You look cool
Shinsengumi
as
from
hell.
the perspective of Mitsuba, Okita's older sister who stayed behind when everyone left for the big city. You see them literally from Mitsuba's point of view and figuratively. Whereas before they just seemed like a misfit group of cops, this arc shows you that they're just about the world's most wholesome brotherhood. But this arc only works because of the comedy arcs. Mitsuba being a masochist when it comes to spicy food is only funny because of Okita's everyday sadism. Her ridiculous habit of drowning food in chili powder is only as funny as it is because it's so similar to Hijikata's bizarre obsession with mayo. And it's not
What?
just the comedy. Okita acting like
Nah, obsession with mayo is crazy.
an innocent schoolboy is only shocking
Nah.
because of the fact that he acts like a
I
villain
hate
on
mayo.
a daily basis. His resentment of Hijikata is only as impactful as it is because we've seen the two characters butt heads a million times before. anyone could enjoy this arc on its own, but you can only fully appreciate it once you've watched all these minor interactions between the characters. This is why the comedy arcs are so important, and why
Yep.
so many people who skim over them don't enjoy the show as much as they should. The comedy arcs aren't there as build-up to the serious arcs. The serious arcs build up the comedy arcs. They supplement these
Oh.
small everyday interactions between the characters.
See, I like this approach, bro. Like the comedy is the main, like the focal point of the show.
And give
I like
you a
it.
new appreciation for those dynamics. And that's why it's difficult to binge Gintama. The story isn't focused on its peaks. It's built on these small interactions that get us invested in the characters, and make the story as funny and emotional as it is. It's only after you realize this that you can understand how Gintama should be watched and why. Going back to what we discussed earlier, Gintama would clearly fall into that category of a weekly experience. Like Saxy pointed out, the chapters in the manga are incredibly dense.
But I wonder, so like, say they're in a comedy arc, and then they switch to the serious arc, bro. Is it just like that? Like, oh shoot, like shit about to happen.
And obviously,
God.
like a lot of long-running shonen, the anime
Like, out of
released
nowhere.
episodes on a weekly basis. Now, of course, I'm not going to tell you you should force yourself to just watch one episode per week. But you also shouldn't force yourself to try and watch Gintama in one go. Saxy likes to read Gintama on
Nah,
the bus, and
I'm gonna
he
take
still
my
loves the
time.
story. Me personally, I started the anime almost 2 years ago. I'd watch a few episodes a night for a few weeks, take a break for about a month or so, then come back and do the same thing over again. Because I didn't force myself to watch all 200-something episodes, I can honestly say that Gintama is one of my all-time favorite anime. And that's how
Gotta
you
take your
should get
time.
into it.
Okay.
Gintama is built on those small, everyday moments. And so that's what you should look forward to. Just because they can get repetitive at times doesn't mean they're poorly written. It's like if you read 200 Garfield comics in 5 minutes. Of course you're going to get sick of Garfield, but nobody would take you seriously if you said Garfield is poorly written after what you did. It's just not how it's meant to be enjoyed.
Garfield goated.
Your value of Gintama depends on the days, weeks, even years you've spent with its family of characters. When you watch Gintama, it's really a commitment. Maybe the comedy won't be for you, but just give it a chance before you shoot it down. And if you like it and do make that commitment, then you need to invest in it for the long run, not the peaks. If you do that, then instead of resenting the majority of Gintama for feeling like it's in the way, you'll love each single episode for what it contributes to the story as a whole. And that's it for this discussion.
I like
Hopefully,
it.
I was able to show you why you should give Gintama a real chance. If I did, then make sure to let me know by liking the video. Also, make sure to comment with your thoughts on Gintama down below. And if
Okay. W video. So what I got from this, take your time, watch every arc. The comedy arcs are very important. That's it. That's all. Okay. W video.